22nd of October, the day in history. October 22nd, a date that quietly shaped the world, from a fearless leap through the skies in 1797 to a Cold War address that held its breath across the globe. It's the day empires were proclaimed, revolutions of light were born, and the stars of art and science aligned to redefine human destiny. Today, we journey through time, across courage, innovation, and the echoes of history. Welcome to this day in history, October 22nd. Stay with us and discover how one ordinary date became extraordinary. Number 1. The first parachute jump by André-Jacques Garnerin, 1797, Paris, October 22nd, 1797. The sky is wide and waiting. A sea of faces gathers below the Parc Monceau, gazing upward at an enormous silk balloon drifting against the crisp autumn air. At its basket stands a man who looks both scientist and dreamer. André-Jacques Garnerin, a former prisoner of war, an engineer, and soon to become the world's first parachutist. He wasn't a daredevil for sport. He was an engineer of the human spirit, a man obsessed with the question, what if falling didn't mean dying? The crowd watched in breathless awe. They'd seen balloons before, since the Montgolfier brothers had ignited China's fascination with flight. But no one had ever dared to leap from one without any safety tether, trusting only a billowing canopy of fabric and air resistance to save them. Garnerin's balloon soared to 3,200 feet, swaying gently as he leaned over the edge, a white parachute folded beneath his basket like the wings of an angel yet to open. He looked down. Paris stretched beneath him like a living map, the Seine glimmering in the distance, rooftops tiny, streets curling like veins of a great city's heart. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, the leap. Garnerin cut the rope. The balloon floated away and the basket, now detached, carrying only the man and his experimental parachute, began its rapid fall. For a few terrifying seconds, it plummeted through the sky. The air tore past his face, the world spinning into a blur, until suddenly, the canopy caught. Whoosh! The parachute opened, snapping wide like a breath of relief from the heavens themselves. The basket swayed violently, tossing him about as onlookers below screamed, gasped, and prayed. But he was safe. Garnerin descended gracefully, like a feather surrendering to gravity's rhythm. When he landed, people rushed to him, some in tears, others shouting his name, all realizing they had just witnessed something historic. That day, humanity crossed an invisible boundary, not between earth and sky, but between fear and possibility. Before Garnerin, flight had been about ascent, the wonder of rising above. But Garnerin gave us the miracle of descent, the art of returning safely from the heavens. His invention, crude as it seemed, would become the foundation for parachuting, skydiving, and even spacecraft re-entry technologies centuries later. It is fascinating to imagine what must have gone through his mind as he prepared for that leap. There were no computers, no pressure suits, not even a safety test, just silk, ropes, and pure conviction. The science behind it was untested. Garnerin had calculated, roughly, that the air resistance of a canopy could slow a fall, but air is unpredictable. Turbulence could collapse a chute, rip it apart, or flip the basket mid-air. And yet, he jumped. Why? Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. For Garnerin, it was curiosity, the relentless drive to turn imagination into reality. After that first successful jump, Garnerin became a sensation. His courage inspired Europe. People began to talk not only about balloons and flight, but about control, how humans could manage their fate even in the face of gravity. In 1799, just 2 years later, his wife, Jeanne-Geneviève Garnerin, followed in his footsteps, becoming the first woman to parachute. The Garnerins became the 18th century equivalent of aviation celebrities, the Wright brothers of falling, long before anyone had ever built an airplane. Their demonstrations spread across Europe. In England, Russia, and beyond, thousands gathered to see the couple take to the skies, to challenge nature, and to descend like angels. But let us pause and think. This was an era when people still traveled by horse and candlelight. To look up and see a human gently floating down from the sky must have seemed like magic. It wasn't just a stunt, it was a message. Human ingenuity knows no bounds. André-Jacques Garnerin's design was revolutionary. His parachute was made of white silk, about 23 feet in diameter, with no vent holes, something that caused it to oscillate wildly. Later, inventors would refine the design, adding air vents and suspension lines for stability. But Garnerin's raw innovation was enough to change everything. Centuries later, NASA engineers would look back and credit early parachute pioneers like him when designing descent systems for probes, landers, and astronauts. Every safe landing, from Apollo capsules to the Mars rovers, carries echoes of that single leap in 1797. Even today, skydivers honor him as the father of parachuting. Every time someone steps out of an aircraft and feels that rush of wind before the parachute opens, they are, in a sense, reliving Garnerin's daring experiment. There's something deeply poetic about this event, too. It happened during a turbulent time, just after the French Revolution, when France was reimagining liberty and human potential. Garnerin's jump wasn't just a scientific act, it symbolized the revolutionary spirit itself, the courage to break free from the old, to challenge limits, to fall and rise again. Imagine being in that Parisian crowd. You'd feel the wind whip through your hair, the gasp of the people around you, the suspense in your chest as the basket fell, only to explode into applause as the parachute unfurled. In that instant, the crowd wasn't watching a man fall. They were watching humanity rise. 2 centuries later, modern skydivers still describe their first jump in the same words Garnerin must have felt: terrifying, beautiful, freeing. So as we look back at October 22, 1797, we see more than an invention. We see a metaphor for progress itself. Every innovation, from airplanes to space shuttles, begins with a leap of faith. A moment where someone says, "Let's try." And sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. So the next time you look up at the sky and see a parachute drifting gently downward, remember that it all began on a crisp October morning, when one man, armed with silk and courage, decided to leap into history. Number 2, International Stuttering Awareness Day, observed globally. Every October 22nd, the world pauses for a moment to listen, not just to words, but to how they're said. Because behind every broken syllable, every pause that stretches too long, and every breath held in quiet frustration, there's a voice fighting to be heard. It's International Stuttering Awareness Day, a global observance that began in 1998, dedicated to breaking the silence surrounding one of humanity's most misunderstood speech differences: stuttering. The power of a pause. To most people, speaking feels automatic, like breathing. But for more than 70 million people worldwide, each word can be a battle. Stuttering, or stammering as it's often called in the UK, isn't just about repetition or hesitation. It's about timing, rhythm, and emotion. For someone who stutters, a single word can feel like climbing a mountain. Every letter another step, every sound another test of courage. Think about it. How often do we judge people by how they speak? In interviews, classrooms, daily conversations, fluent speech is rewarded, while pauses are misunderstood. But those pauses tell stories too. They reveal determination, strength, and an unbreakable will to communicate. The beginning of a global movement. The idea for International Stuttering Awareness Day was born from collaboration between 3 major organizations: the International Fluency Association, the International Stuttering Association, and the European League of Stuttering Associations. In the late 1990s, these groups recognized something vital. Awareness wasn't enough. Acceptance was needed. They wanted a day that didn't pity those who stuttered but celebrated them. A day that said, "Your voice matters, exactly as it is." So on October 22, 1998, the world celebrated the first International Stuttering Awareness Day. Since then, every year brings new themes, like Speak the Change, Growth Through Communication, and One Voice, Many Stories. Each theme reminds us that fluency doesn't define intelligence, creativity, or worth. Understanding the science. What actually causes stuttering? The answer is complex and fascinating. Stuttering arises from subtle differences in how the brain processes speech. It's not caused by anxiety or nerves, though those can make it worse. Neuroscientists now know that it often involves disruptions in timing between areas of the brain that plan speech and those that execute it. Think of it as an orchestra where the instruments are slightly out of sync. The music, the speech, is still there, but the rhythm falters. Genetics play a part too. Studies suggest that around 60% of people who stutter have a family history of it. Yet, despite centuries of curiosity, stuttering remains one of the most beautifully mysterious aspects of human communication. And that is what makes it so profoundly human, because it reminds us that speech isn't mechanical. It's emotional, layered, alive. Stuttering in history. History is filled with voices that once trembled. Take Demosthenes, the ancient Greek orator who stuffed pebbles in his mouth to train his speech and became one of the greatest speakers in history. Or King George VI of England, whose struggles and courage inspired the Oscar-winning film, The King's Speech. Then there's Winston Churchill, known for his unshakable rhetoric, who also battled speech difficulties in his youth. Even Marilyn Monroe, whose signature breathy tone wasn't an affectation. It was her way of controlling a childhood stutter. Today, some of the most influential voices in the world stutter. Actor Samuel L. Jackson, singer Ed Sheeran, political leader Joe Biden, and poet-activist Amanda Gorman. Each proof that a stutter doesn't silence greatness. It gives it rhythm, breaking stereotypes. For decades, pop culture mocked stuttering, using it for laughs, portraying it as nervousness or weakness. But the tide is turning. Modern media and advocacy campaigns are reclaiming the narrative. Shows, documentaries, and social media movements highlight real stories, not caricatures. One example is the documentary My Beautiful Stutter, produced by Paul Rudd and Emily Blunt, both parents of children who stutter. It follows kids attending Camp Say, a summer camp where speech isn't judged and every voice is celebrated. The impact? Transformational. Kids who once avoided speaking suddenly find confidence, realizing that communication isn't about perfection. It's about connection. Psychological weight. The physical act of stuttering is one thing, the emotional toll is another. Many children who stutter develop social anxiety early. They fear ridicule, interruptions, or impatience. Some stop speaking altogether in class or at social gatherings. That's why awareness matters, not for sympathy, but for empathy. Imagine if listeners gave space, literally a few extra seconds, for someone to finish their thought without rushing or correcting them. Those seconds could change a life. Speech-language therapists often say the real goal isn't fluency, but freedom. Freedom to speak without fear, to express ideas without shame. Technology and hope. Modern therapy and technology are rewriting what's possible. Real-time feedback devices, virtual reality exposure therapy, and AI-driven rhythm tools help speakers practice fluency patterns. But more importantly, online communities give people the one thing they need most: understanding. Apps like Stammerai and forums such as Stuttering Community on Reddit have become safe spaces where thousands share progress, setbacks, and triumphs. And yet, perhaps the greatest technology is still the human heart, the willingness to listen patiently. The global sound of solidarity. Every year on October 22nd, monuments light up in blue, the color of awareness and calm. Speech therapists hold seminars. Schools organize empathy workshops. Influencers and public figures post videos of themselves reading aloud slowly, embracing pauses, showing that imperfection is universal. In London, the British Stammering Association hosts open mic nights where people share poetry, stories, and laughter, proving that speech diversity is beautiful. In India, awareness walks take place in cities like Delhi and Chennai. In Nigeria and South Africa, NGOs use radio programs to challenge myths and promote early intervention. The message is clear. This is not a day of pity. It's a day of pride. A human story. Imagine a little boy standing in front of his class, gripping a sheet of paper, heart pounding. He knows the words. He's practiced them, but the first syllable won't come out. The room goes quiet. Someone giggles. He feels that familiar wave of shame. Now imagine years later, That same boy speaking on stage to thousands, voice still trembling, but eyes full of confidence. That's what International Stuttering Awareness Day stands for. Not the absence of struggle, but the triumph over silence. Famous words, imperfectly spoken. One of the most moving moments in recent memory came when President Joe Biden, a lifelong stutterer, spoke publicly about his condition. He said, "When you can't find the words, it feels like your throat is closing. But remember, you are not broken." Those words resonated worldwide, not because of eloquence, but authenticity. Similarly, when Ed Sheeran told children at a charity event that he used to stutter until he started rapping along to Eminem, he gave them something science can't: hope wrapped in melody. The real challenge, listening. So perhaps the question on this day isn't how can we cure stuttering, but rather, how can we become better listeners? Because every time someone finishes their thought without being interrupted or mocked, a barrier breaks. Every time a teacher gives a student time to answer, confidence blooms. Fluency isn't a measure of intelligence. Patience is a measure of humanity. As October 22nd rolls around each year, remember, somewhere, someone is taking a breath before speaking, summoning courage invisible to most. This day belongs to them, to every voice that trembled and spoke anyway. So the next time you hear someone stutter, don't finish their sentence. Don't look away, look with them. Because communication isn't about how fast the words arrive. It is about the truth they carry when they do. This is International Stuttering Awareness Day, a global reminder that every voice, no matter how it sounds, deserves to be heard. Section 3, National Nut Day, USA. On October 22nd, while the world talks about stuttering awareness, something else is quietly being cracked open across the United States, quite literally. It's National Nut Day, a lighthearted, wholesome celebration of nature's most compact source of nutrition, energy, and crunch. From almonds to walnuts, cashews to pistachios, today's the day Americans tip their hats, or perhaps their snack bowls, to the humble nut. But beneath that satisfying crunch lies a fascinating story that spans thousands of years. Ancient civilizations, global trade routes, and even modern superfood science. So grab a handful, because this story goes way deeper than the shell. The origin of National Nut Day. National Nut Day wasn't always a foodie favorite. It was first created in 2005 by the Liberation Foods Company, a UK-based fair trade organization, to promote ethical nut production and support smallholder farmers in developing countries. But like all good ideas, it caught on, and by the early 2010s, Americans made it their own, turning it into a national day of appreciation for all things nutty. It's celebrated every October 22, aligning perfectly with the autumn harvest season, when pecans, chestnuts, and walnuts are freshly picked and roasting becomes an aromatic ritual across kitchens and markets. A snack with ancient roots. Before they were sprinkled on salads or crushed into butter, nuts were a survival food, small but mighty sources of protein and healthy fat. Archaeologists have found evidence of nuts in prehistoric settlements dating back over 780,000 years. The earliest humans gathered almonds, acorns, and pine nuts long before agriculture even began. Fast forward to ancient Egypt. Pharaohs were buried with almonds, symbolizing prosperity in the afterlife. In Greece, nuts were considered symbols of fertility. In Persia and India, they were exchanged during festivals, believed to bring good luck. And in North America, indigenous peoples ground nuts into pastes and flours long before nut butter was a supermarket staple. It's no exaggeration to say, nuts have fed humanity through nearly every age of civilization, the science inside the shell. So, what makes nuts so special? For starters, they're nutrient powerhouses. Each small kernel is packed with plant-based protein, fiber, antioxidants, and essential fats, especially omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. These not only support heart health, but also reduce inflammation and boost brain function. Consider this. Almonds are rich in vitamin E and magnesium, great for skin and nerves. Walnuts contain the highest omega-3 levels of any tree nut. Cashews provide zinc and copper for immune and bone health. Pistachios support gut health with prebiotic fiber. Nutritionists often call nuts the perfect snack. Dense, portable, and satisfying without the sugar crash. And contrary to old myths, research now shows that regular nut consumption is linked to lower cholesterol and longer lifespan, not weight gain. As Harvard Health put it, people who eat nuts live longer. Nuts in American culture. In America, nuts have evolved from survival food to culinary icons. Think about it. What's a movie night without peanuts? Thanksgiving without pecan pie? Or a road trip without a trail mix in the glove box? Each nut has its own story here. Peanuts, for example, aren't technically nuts. They're legumes. Yet they're America's most beloved nut, largely thanks to George Washington Carver, the agricultural scientist who revolutionized southern farming in the early 1900s. Carver developed over 300 uses for peanuts, from peanut butter and flour to soap and paper, transforming a humble crop into an industry that fed both people and progress. Then came the almond boom in California, where orchards now stretch across miles of fertile valley soil, producing over 80% of the world's almonds. And who could forget Hawaiian macadamias, Georgia pecans, or California pistachios, each now woven into regional identity and local pride. Nut butter revolution. In the 21st century, the nut world got smooth, literally. The rise of nut butters, almond, cashew, hazelnut, even pistachio, turned these ancient snacks into pantry staples for health-conscious Americans. With vegan diets, protein trends, and clean-eating movements gaining traction, nuts became the go-to ingredient for wholesome snacking. Even global brands jumped in: almond milk, nut-based protein bars, dairy-free spreads, all born from the same humble ingredient our ancestors once foraged by hand. In a way, nuts tell a story of human evolution, from survival to sophistication. The sustainability side. But here is the twist: not all nuts are created equal when it comes to the planet. While nuts are nutritious, some crops like almonds have been criticized for their high water usage, especially in drought-prone California. That's why many farmers are shifting towards sustainable nut farming practices: drip irrigation, bee-friendly pollination, and regenerative soil care. Meanwhile, fair trade initiatives continue to support small-scale nut farmers in Africa, Asia, and South America, ensuring that the global nut trade remains ethical and inclusive. So when we celebrate National Nut Day, it's not just about flavor. It's also about fairness, sustainability, and the people behind every harvest. Fun facts to crack open. Let's sprinkle in a few nutty facts that might surprise you. The cashew nut actually grows outside the cashew apple. It's the seed attached to the fruit base. Pistachios are known as the smiling nuts in Iran and the happy nuts in China. Their shells naturally split open when ripe, resembling a grin. Walnuts were once called Jupiter's royal acorn by the Romans, symbolizing divine intelligence. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich was originally considered an elite snack served at tea parties before it became a lunchbox classic. The largest nut in the world, the coco de mer, grows in Seychelles. Each seed can weigh up to 40 pounds. And here's a modern one. According to the American Peanut Council, the average American eats over 6 pounds of peanuts every year. That's a lot of crunch. The cultural symbolism of nuts. Across cultures, nuts symbolize abundance, fertility, and good fortune. They've been part of wedding feasts, religious offerings, and New Year celebrations for centuries. In the U.S., giving mixed nuts as a holiday gift is seen as a gesture of warmth and prosperity, a small but thoughtful token of nourishment and connection. Even language reflects their charm. Phrases like "tough nut to crack" or "go nuts" reveal just how deeply they've embedded themselves into everyday life. How America celebrates National Nut Day: sound of laughter, clinking bowls, light chatter. Across the country, National Nut Day has become a fun excuse to get creative in the kitchen. Restaurants feature nut-based specials, from pistachio-encrusted chicken to almond-crusted salmon. Cafes whip up hazelnut lattes, and food bloggers flood the internet with recipes for granola bars, trail mixes, and homemade nut butters. Schools often use the day to teach children about healthy snacking and the global origins of nuts, connecting the dots between farmers, trade, and nutrition. Even social media gets in on the fun, with hashtags like Trencher National Nut Day and Trencher Get Nuts trending every October 22nd. It's a day that's light, cheerful, and, yes, a little nutty in the best possible way. Beyond food, the metaphor of a nut. But maybe, just maybe, National Nut Day is about more than food. A nut is small, tough, and unassuming. But inside that hard shell lies nourishment, potential, and life. In a poetic way, it mirrors people too. We all have shells, our defenses, our fears, our stories. But when opened with patience and care, what's inside is often full of value. So perhaps this day is also a reminder to look past the surface of food, of nature, of each other, to the goodness within. Voices from the orchard, sound design, light rustling leaves, distant laughter from a family picnic. Farmers in California say harvest time is their favorite part of the year. The scent of roasted almonds in the air, the golden light hitting the fields. A grower once told a journalist, "When you plant a nut tree, you don't just grow food, you plant patience. It takes years before it bears fruit, but once it does, it feeds generations." There's a kind of wisdom in that. Nuts teach patience, reward consistency, and remind us that growth often happens quietly, beneath the shell. So this October 22nd, whether you're snacking on almonds, cracking pecans by the fireplace, or stirring peanut butter into your smoothie, take a moment to appreciate what is in your hand. It's not just a snack, it's history, science, culture, and care, wrapped up in a tiny, crunchy miracle of nature. Because sometimes the smallest things, the ones we snack on absent-mindedly, carry the biggest stories. So go ahead, grab a handful, share it, laugh a little, and celebrate the nutty side of life. Number 4. Kennedy's Cuban Missile Crisis Address, 1962. October 22, 1962, a night when the world held its breath. At precisely 7 p.m. Eastern Time, millions of Americans gathered around their televisions and radios, unaware that they were about to witness one of the most consequential speeches in modern history. From the Oval Office, President John F. Kennedy looked directly into the camera, calm, resolute, yet burdened. The words he was about to deliver would not just shape U.S. foreign policy, they would bring the world to the edge of nuclear war. A world on the brink. To understand the gravity of that moment, we have to rewind a few tense weeks. In the fall of 1962, Cold War tensions were already sky high. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an ideological arms race: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus dictatorship, freedom versus fear. But this time, it wasn't just ideology, it was nuclear missiles. Real, tangible, and dangerously close. American reconnaissance planes flying over Cuba had captured photographic evidence of Soviet nuclear missile sites being constructed just 90 miles from Florida. For Kennedy, this wasn't just another geopolitical chess move. It was an existential threat. If operational, those missiles could strike most of the continental United States within minutes. In simple terms, humanity was a single decision away from total annihilation. The moment of truth. Inside the White House, Kennedy and his closest advisors, known as ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, debated in secrecy for nearly a week. Military leaders urged immediate airstrikes. Some demanded a full invasion of Cuba. Others, including Attorney General Robert Kennedy, pushed for diplomacy first. Every option carried immense risk. Attack and risk starting World War III. Do nothing and risk appearing weak in the face of Soviet aggression. It was a dilemma only a few men in history have faced: how to defend freedom without destroying the planet. The speech that shook the world. Finally, Kennedy made his choice. On October 22, 1962, he decided to speak directly to the American people and to the world. That evening, he sat at his desk in the Oval Office, the presidential seal glinting behind him. Cameras rolled, silence filled the room. Then, with measured confidence, he began, Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. He revealed to the public, for the first time, that the Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba and that the United States was responding with a strict naval quarantine to prevent further shipments of offensive weapons. He demanded that the Soviets dismantle their missiles and return them to the USSR, or face the consequences. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Those words, calm, deliberate, and absolute, echoed through living rooms across America and command bunkers across Moscow. The nuclear clock had begun ticking. Global reaction. The world erupted in a storm of fear and speculation. Radio stations across Europe interrupted programming to relay Kennedy's message. In Havana, Fidel Castro ordered Cuban forces to full alert. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev faced a decision that could define the fate of civilization. For 13 days, the world teetered on the knife's edge. People built bomb shelters. Schools conducted duck and cover drills. Churches filled with families praying for peace. Every hour, military jets flew reconnaissance missions over Cuba. U.S. naval destroyers patrolled the Caribbean. Submarines waited silently below the waves. Each side stared at the other, finger hovering over the red button. It was, as historians later called it, the most dangerous moment in human history. Kennedy's leadership under fire. What made Kennedy's handling of the crisis remarkable wasn't just his restraint. It was his strategy. He understood that power wasn't only about weapons. It was about communication, perception, and calm under pressure. While generals demanded aggressive strikes, Kennedy saw the value of time. Time to think, to negotiate, and to give his adversary a way out without humiliation. In private, he sent back-channel messages to Khrushchev through trusted intermediaries. Publicly, he maintained firm resolve. This dual approach, public strength, private diplomacy, became a hallmark of effective crisis management. It showed the world that true leadership isn't about loud threats, it's about calculated courage. The turning point. As U.S. naval forces enforced the blockade, Soviet ships carrying additional missiles approached the line. At any moment, one wrong move, a misread radar blip, an accidental shot, could have triggered an all-out war. But on October 24th, something unexpected happened. Soviet ships began to slow down, then turn back. The world exhaled, just a little. Behind closed doors, frantic negotiations continued. Khrushchev eventually agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade the island, and a secret agreement to remove American missiles from Turkey. By October 28th, the crisis was over. The world had come back from the edge, not through war, but through wisdom. The legacy of October 22nd. Kennedy's address remains one of the most iconic speeches in modern history, not just for its rhetoric, but for its impact. It marked the first time an American president spoke openly to the public about the threat of nuclear war, explaining complex global politics in clear, direct terms. It was a masterclass in crisis communication, honest, informative, and composed. In those 18 minutes, Kennedy didn't just inform the nation, he inspired confidence when fear was the default emotion. His leadership helped shape a generation's belief that reason and dialogue could triumph over destruction. And perhaps more importantly, it led to the establishment of direct communication lines between Washington and Moscow. The famous red telephone hotline designed to prevent misunderstandings in future crises. The human side of the Cold War beyond the politics, the Cuban Missile Crisis, revealed something deeply human: the fragility of life and the power of restraint. In both the U.S. and the Soviet Union, ordinary citizens faced the same fears for their families, their futures, their survival. Kennedy's speech didn't just mobilize governments. It unified people under a shared understanding that nuclear war had no winners. As Kennedy himself later reflected, above all, while defending our vital interests, Nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either humiliating retreat or nuclear war. Those words still echo in every diplomatic chamber today. Questions for you. What would you have done sitting in Kennedy's chair? Would you risk global annihilation to protect your nation's honor? Or gamble on diplomacy when every second counts? History often celebrates victories on battlefields, but sometimes the greatest victory is the war that never happened. October 22, 1962 will forever stand as a reminder of how close humanity came to ending itself, and how leadership, courage, and communication can pull it back from the brink. When President Kennedy addressed the world that night, he wasn't just speaking to Americans, he was speaking to all of humanity, past, present, and future. And in that brief, tense moment in history, one man's words outweighed the world's weapons. Because sometimes, peace isn't won by power, it's preserved by prudence. Number 5. The rise of Papa Doc. François Duvalier becomes president of Haiti, 1957. The year was 1957, and Haiti was a nation at a breaking point. Decades of instability, coups, and class division had left scars deeper than the eye could see. Port-au-Prince trembled under the weight of unrest. Soldiers patrolled streets still cracked from revolts, and whispers of yet another power struggle drifted through the humid Caribbean air. Into this atmosphere of exhaustion stepped a man the world would come to know by a name that would send chills through generations. François Duvalier, or as history branded him, Papa Doc. A doctor before a dictator. Before he became one of the most feared leaders in the Western Hemisphere, Duvalier was a physician, a quiet, introspective man devoted to public health. In the 1940s, he traveled through Haiti's remote villages, treating malaria, yaws, and typhus. His medical work earned him deep respect among Haiti's poor black majority. He wasn't like the elite politicians of Port-au-Prince, men with French ancestry and European education who looked down on the rural poor. Duvalier was the people's man, soft-spoken, compassionate, with an understanding of Haiti's spiritual heart. He didn't just heal bodies, he listened to stories, absorbed the rhythm of the countryside, and learned the language of belief, Vodou. It was in those rural clinics that the legend of Papa Doc began, not as a tyrant, but as a healer. The birth of a political messiah. By the early 1950s, Haiti's political system had rotted from within. Presidents came and went, some toppled by coup, others by corruption. The people craved stability. In 1957, after another bloody power struggle, presidential elections were announced. François Duvalier emerged as the unlikely candidate of the poor. He ran a populist campaign rooted in Noirisme, a movement that celebrated Haiti's African roots and challenged the dominance of the light-skinned elite. His slogan was simple yet powerful: the revolution of the black majority. In rallies across the nation, he appeared as a humble, fatherly figure, always calm, always deliberate. His speeches weren't fiery, they were hypnotic. He spoke of unity, dignity, and national pride, invoking not just politics but prophecy. For a nation long divided by race and class, Duvalier seemed heaven-sent. When he won the election in September 1957, celebrations erupted in the streets. The doctor had become president. The people believed healing had finally come. But history, as it often does, had other plans. From healer to ruler, the transformation begins. The moment Duvalier took office, the tone shifted. The smile faded. His voice grew colder. He began by removing those he deemed untrustworthy, the generals, ministers, and bureaucrats who questioned his authority. He replaced them with loyalists, many from the same rural communities that had once adored him. Soon, Haiti's army, long the arbiter of political power, was dismantled in favor of a new force loyal only to Duvalier, the Tonton Macoute. The birth of fear, the Tonton Macoute. Officially known as the Milice Volontaire de la Sécurité Nationale, the Tonton Macoute were more than just a secret police. They were the embodiment of terror. Wearing dark sunglasses, denim shirts, and straw hats, they moved through the streets like ghosts. Their name came from Haitian folklore, Tonton Macoute, The bogeyman said to kidnap unruly children in a straw bag. They didn't need uniforms to command obedience. Their silence was enough. Opposition voices vanished. Newspapers were shut down. Critics disappeared into the night. Within months, Duvalier had replaced Haiti's fragile democracy with a cult of fear. But it wasn't just violence that kept him in power. It was something deeper, something psychological, a mastery of belief. The Vodou presidency, politics of the supernatural. Duvalier understood the pulse of Haiti's soul. The country's identity was intertwined with Vodou, a religion that blended African spiritualism with Catholicism. It was the rhythm of the people, their music, their stories, their strength. Duvalier weaponized that belief. He began to portray himself as a mystical figure, a man chosen by divine will. Posters of Papa Doc appeared beside images of saints. In speeches, he compared himself to Jesus and the Haitian revolutionary leader Toussaint Louverture. Rumors spread that he could communicate with spirits, that he could curse his enemies, that his power was not just political, it was supernatural. And for a people raised on centuries of colonial trauma and spiritual resilience, that claim held weight. Opposition to Duvalier wasn't just rebellion, it was blasphemy. Propaganda and control, the cult of Papa Doc. The dictator's genius lay not in brute force alone, but in theatrical manipulation. He turned politics into a performance. Every public appearance was choreographed. Music played as he walked into rooms. He rarely smiled. His speech was slow, deliberate, echoing with prophetic undertones. State media hailed him as the savior of the black nation. Children in schools recited prayers in his name. Portraits of him replaced the crucifix in public buildings. He rewrote the Constitution to make himself president for life, and to legally ensure his son would succeed him. In the eyes of his followers, Papa Doc was not just a president, he was Haiti itself. Isolation and survival, a nation in darkness. By the early 1960s, Haiti had become one of the most isolated countries in the Western Hemisphere. The economy withered. Intellectuals fled. Entire villages lived under the shadow of the Tonton Macoute. And yet, Duvalier survived, even thrived. During the Cold War, the United States, fearful of communist expansion in the Caribbean after Cuba's revolution, tolerated Duvalier's regime. He cleverly presented himself as an anti-communist ally, using the geopolitical tension to secure aid. To the outside world, he was eccentric but stable. To Haitians, he was omnipresent, a man who saw everything and trusted no one. He even staged fake assassination attempts to justify further crackdowns. Every crisis was an opportunity to tighten control. Madness and legacy. As the years passed, Papa Doc withdrew further into isolation. Paranoid and increasingly ill, he became obsessed with mystical power. He claimed to be the reincarnation of Baron Samedi, the Vodou spirit of death. His speeches took on an eerie, almost otherworldly tone. He surrounded himself with fortune-tellers, priests, and loyalists who fed his delusions. Meanwhile, the Haitian people suffered. Poverty deepened, education collapsed, infrastructure crumbled. And yet, propaganda continued to broadcast the message of divine leadership. By the time Duvalier died in 1971, Haiti was a shell of its former self, a land where faith and fear had fused into one. At his funeral, thousands wept, not all from grief, but from uncertainty. His 19-year-old son, Jean-Claude "Baby Doc" Duvalier, inherited the presidency, continuing the dynasty for another 15 years. The shadow of Papa Doc. François Duvalier's story is one of paradoxes. A healer who became a destroyer. A man who rose to power through love and ruled through terror. Even today, his legacy divides Haiti. Some remember him as the man who stood up for the black majority. Others recall the screams in the night, the silence of fear, and the long shadow of dictatorship. His life poses a haunting question. Can power ever coexist with purity of purpose? The man who once saved lives with medicine ended up poisoning his nation's soul. As the Caribbean night fades, we move from Haiti's dark past to a moment that illuminated humanity's path forward. a spark of invention that reshaped the modern world. Number 6. Sam Houston, inaugurated President of the Republic of Texas, 1836. Dawn over the Lone Star Land. The year was 1836. The Texas sun rose slowly over an unsettled land, one still echoing with the gunfire of revolution and the cries of independence. Dust swirled in the air as a crowd gathered in Columbia, the small town serving as the fledgling capital of the newborn Republic of Texas. The people were weary, sunburned, and barefoot, but their hearts were aflame. They had done the impossible, stood up to one of the most powerful military empires in the world, Mexico, and declared their independence. And now, as the morning light painted the horizon gold, they were about to inaugurate their first elected president, a man whose courage, strategy, and sheer will had made Texas free. That man was Sam Houston, the making of a frontier legend. To understand that moment, one must understand the man. Sam Houston's life was as wild and unpredictable as the frontier he came to rule. Born in Virginia in 1793 and raised in Tennessee, Houston was a man of contradictions: soldier, politician, wanderer, and dreamer. He served under Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812, where he earned both fame and scars. After the war, he rose quickly in American politics, first as a congressman, then as governor of Tennessee. But fate is rarely gentle with ambitious men. In 1829, following a scandalous separation from his wife, Houston resigned the governorship and vanished into the wilderness. He lived among the Cherokee Nation, who adopted him and gave him the name Colana, meaning the raven. There, in the deep woods, Sam Houston found peace. But destiny wasn't done with him yet. The Texas Revolution, a war for independence. By the early 1830s, the winds of rebellion were sweeping through the Mexican territory of Texas. American settlers, drawn by promises of land, were clashing with the Mexican government under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, whose centralization of power angered both locals and settlers. In 1835, the conflict erupted into war. Texas declared its independence in March 1836, but the victory was far from certain. The defenders of the Alamo had been slaughtered. Goliad had fallen. The revolution seemed doomed. Then came Sam Houston. Appointed commander-in-chief of the Texan forces, Houston understood that a reckless charge would only lead to annihilation. While critics called him cowardly for retreating, Houston was calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came on April 21, 1836, at the Battle of San Jacinto. The roar of San Jacinto, freedom in 18 minutes. It was late afternoon when Houston's ragtag army with a cry that would echo through time. "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" the Texans charged. The battle lasted just 18 minutes. When the smoke cleared, more than 600 Mexican soldiers lay dead. Texas had won its independence, and Sam Houston, wounded in the leg but unbroken, became the face of a new nation. He was carried from the battlefield to thunderous cheers, not as a soldier, but as the founding father of Texas liberty. The inauguration, birth of a nation, October 22, 1836, Columbia, Texas. The heat clung heavy to the air as a crowd gathered outside a simple wooden building. Flags bearing a single white star fluttered in the breeze. The Republic of Texas, barely 7 months old, was ready to choose its path forward. Sam Houston, tall, rugged, his face marked by war and wisdom, took the stage. In his hand, a copy of the newly written Constitution of the Republic of Texas. When he placed his hand upon the Bible and swore the oath of office, the cheers of independence rang across the prairie. In that instant, Texas was no longer just a rebellion, it was a nation. The Republic's fragile beginning. But independence, as Houston knew, was fragile. The new republic was broke, battered, and surrounded by enemies. Mexico refused to recognize its sovereignty, and native tribes resisted the encroachment of settlers. Houston's task as president was monumental. He had to build a country from scratch. He began by disbanding most of the army to save money, infuriating some of his generals. He opened diplomatic talks with the United States, knowing that annexation might be the only way for Texas to survive. He even reached out to Mexico, hoping to negotiate peace. But he also had to manage internal chaos. Rival leaders plotting against him, debts piling up, and lawlessness spreading across the frontier. Still, Houston remained calm, pragmatic, and cunning, a rare politician who understood that strength didn't always come from force, but from patience. A leader of paradoxes. Sam Houston was unlike any leader of his time. He was part warrior, part philosopher. He dressed in buckskins, quoted Shakespeare, and prayed like a preacher. He was known for his booming voice and commanding presence, but also for his deep compassion toward the common man. He treated Native Americans with respect, unusual for the era, and defended their rights in speeches that shocked his contemporaries. "Remember," he once said, "that humanity is above all politics." But he was also a realist. He knew that the Republic of Texas could not stand forever on its own. The dream of independence was glorious, but survival meant compromise. Diplomacy and destiny, the path toward annexation. Houston's presidency laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most consequential moments in North American history, the annexation of Texas into the United States. He courted American recognition with calculated patience. In 1837, U.S. President Andrew Jackson, Houston's old mentor, formally recognized the Republic of Texas. It was a diplomatic triumph, but Houston knew it was just the beginning. He pushed for annexation, believing Texas's security depended on the protection of a larger nation. But not everyone agreed. Many Texans, fueled by pride and independence, resisted the idea of becoming part of another country so soon after breaking free. Still, Houston's vision was clear. Texas's destiny lay not in isolation, but in unity. The end of a term, the beginning of a legacy. After serving his term, Houston stepped down in 1838, a rare act for a revolutionary leader. He could have seized more power. He could have ruled as a war hero. But he believed democracy was the cornerstone of freedom. Even in retirement, his influence lingered. When Texas eventually joined the United States in 1845, it was Houston who stood before Congress and declared, "Texas has been admitted to the Union." He later became a U.S. Senator, and then, remarkably, the only man in American history to serve as governor of two different states, Tennessee and Texas. But his defining moment, the one that sealed his name in history, was that day in 1836, when he stood beneath the blazing Texas sky and swore to lead a land born of rebellion and resilience. Legacy of the Lone Star Leader. Today, more than a century later, Sam Houston's name lives on, carved into cities, monuments, and universities. His statue towers over the highways of Texas, a symbol of determination, independence, and the rugged spirit that defines the state. He was far from perfect, stubborn, temperamental, sometimes contradictory. But in a land where survival required more than idealism, Houston embodied the hard truth of leadership, that freedom must be fought for, nurtured, and above all, defended with wisdom. He didn't just found a republic, he forged an identity, one that still beats in every Texan heart today. As the echoes of Houston's inauguration fade into the vast Texas plains, we turn to another event that shaped how humanity understood the world itself. A gathering of nations in 1884 that defined time, space, and the very line dividing East from West. Coming up next, the International Meridian Conference, and how Greenwich became the center of the world. Number 7, the International Meridian Conference, 1884. How Greenwich became the center of the world divided by time. Imagine a world before time zones, a world where every town set its clock by the local sun. Noon was when the sun was directly overhead, but only there. In the next city, noon might be 5 minutes earlier, in the next, 10 minutes later. It worked fine when travel meant horse-drawn carriages and sailboats. But by the late 19th century, the world was racing ahead. Steam trains and telegraphs were shrinking distances. And with that progress came chaos. Train collisions, missed telegrams, misaligned schedules, all because no one could agree on what time it really was. Something had to change. So, in October 1884, the most powerful nations on Earth gathered in Washington, D.C. to solve one of humanity's simplest, yet most profound problems: Where on earth should the world begin? A world out of sync. By the 1870s, the Industrial Revolution had transformed global life. Trains crossed continents, ships connected empires. Telegraph lines pulsed with messages faster than the wind. Yet every nation, even every city, clung to its own local time. In the United States alone, there were more than 300 different local times. One city might be 12 noon, another 12:17, another 12:42. For railway companies, it was a scheduling nightmare. The problem wasn't just the hour, it was the longitude. The Earth spins 360 degrees in 24 hours, meaning every 15 degrees of longitude equals 1 hour's difference. But unless the world could agree on a single starting point, a prime meridian, everyone was measuring from somewhere else. France measured from Paris, Spain from Madrid, the Dutch used Amsterdam, the Americans used Washington. Britain naturally measured from Greenwich. It was, quite literally, a world without a common direction. The call for order entered Sir Sandford Fleming, a Scottish-born Canadian engineer and visionary who had spent his life working on transcontinental railways. Fleming saw firsthand how inconsistent timekeeping caused confusion and accidents. In the 1870s, he began campaigning for a global system of time, one built around 24 standard time zones, each representing an hour of the Earth's rotation. But his plan required one crucial thing: a universal prime meridian. So, Fleming called for an international conference, a meeting of minds to bring order to global navigation and timekeeping. That meeting became the International Meridian Conference of 1884. Washington, D.C. The world gathers. It was a crisp October morning when delegates from 25 nations gathered at the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington. The goal: to choose one longitude as the world's zero. The room buzzed with tension. This wasn't just about science, it was about politics, prestige, and pride. Whoever won the vote would shape maps, clocks, and history itself. Presiding over the conference was Chester Arthur, President of the United States, who declared that the world had reached a moment of universal necessity. Around the table sat representatives from Britain, France, Russia, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Japan, Brazil, Chile, and others. Each carried centuries of national pride and centuries of rivalry. The case for Greenwich. The British delegation, led by Sir George Airy, the Astronomer Royal, made their case confidently. The Royal Observatory at Greenwich, they argued, was already the reference point for nearly 2/3 of all the world's ships. The British Empire ruled the seas, and its charts were measured from Greenwich. In practical terms, most of the world already navigated using Greenwich as the zero line. Why fight what was already working? The French delegation, however, wasn't so willing to concede. France was still a global power, and Paris had long been its scientific heart. They argued for neutrality, perhaps a meridian through the Canary Islands or somewhere in the Atlantic. But behind the politeness, the tension was unmistakable. Choosing Greenwich wasn't just a matter of geography. It meant recognizing Britain as the center of the world. The vote that shaped time. After weeks of debate, data, and diplomacy, the conference moved to a vote on October 22, 1884. The result was decisive, though not unanimous. 22 nations voted in favor of Greenwich as the prime meridian. One nation voted against: France. 2 abstained: San Domingo and Brazil. And just like that, Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, became the standard by which the world would set its clocks. The motion passed, and humanity, for the first time, had a shared framework for time and space. The world finally agreed where zero was. The birth of time itself. With Greenwich established as the prime meridian, the world was divided into 24 time zones, each representing 1 hour of Earth's rotation. The meridian opposite Greenwich, at 180 degrees, became the international date line, where one day ends and another begins. The effects were immediate. Railways ran on coordinated timetables, telegraphs synchronized across continents. And global navigation, from the oceans to the skies, entered a new age of precision. What had begun as a technical problem became one of the greatest achievements in global cooperation, a silent, invisible agreement that now defines how every second of our lives is measured. the French resistance. But not everyone accepted the decision right away. France, ever proud of its scientific heritage, refused to use Greenwich for decades. French maps and clocks continued to measure from the Paris meridian until 1911, when international pressure and practicality finally prevailed. Even then, France renamed Greenwich Mean Time as Heure Universelle, Universal Time, just to avoid saying Greenwich. It was a small act of defiance, but one that captured the deep symbolism of the vote. The Prime Meridian wasn't just a line on a map. It was a declaration of influence, of who led the modern world. Time, power, and legacy. Looking back, the 1884 conference was more than a scientific milestone. It was a reflection of the 19th century's shifting balance of power. The choice of Greenwich represented not only practicality, but the sheer reach of the British Empire, its navy, its trade, its global networks of science and industry. Time itself had become an extension of empire. Wherever the Union Jack sailed, Greenwich followed. And yet, this act of dominance also birthed something universal, a shared human order that transcended borders. Today, even in a post-imperial world, Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, still traces its roots back to that moment in 1884. The human connection to time. It's easy to forget that every glance at your wristwatch, every meeting across time zones, every countdown to New Year's Eve, all of it, is linked to that single conference in Washington 140 years ago. The rhythm of global life, synchronized flights, digital networks, atomic clocks, stems from that day. Humanity finally agreed on where the world begins. And perhaps, in a poetic way, it is fitting that the place chosen was in the grandest or most powerful city of all time. But Greenwich, a quiet London suburb where astronomers once gazed at the stars and dreamed of order in the chaos. Reflection and transition. From the dusty corridors of diplomacy to the ticking heartbeat of our global civilization, the International Meridian Conference marked the dawn of true globalization. It taught humanity that even amid rivalries we could still agree, if only on one thing: what time it is. As the final gavel fell in 1884, the delegates might not have realized the magnitude of what they'd done. They didn't just set the clocks, they set the course of history. And as the world ticked forward into the modern age, their invisible line continued to divide, yet unite, the Earth. As the world synchronized its clocks to Greenwich, another empire was asserting its power and identity, one that would reshape the very concept of monarchy, expansion, and destiny. Up next, the establishment of the Russian Empire, 1721, when Peter the Great transformed a kingdom into a global powerhouse. Number 8. Opening of the Metropolitan Opera House, 1883, a stage where America found its voice. New York City, October 22, 1883. The gas lamps flickered along Broadway, carriages rolled through the chilly autumn evening, and the city's elite, men in black coats, women wrapped in velvet and diamonds, gathered before a building that would redefine America's cultural identity, the Metropolitan Opera House. It was more than just a theater. It was a declaration that America, young and restless, could finally stand beside Europe not only in wealth and ambition, but in art, refinement, and music. A dream born of exclusion. The story of the Metropolitan Opera begins not with applause, but with rejection. In the mid-19th century, the Academy of Music was the reigning opera venue in New York, but its exclusive box seats were owned by only a few hundred of the city's oldest families, the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Schermerhorns among them. For the new millionaires rising from the age of steel, oil, and railroads, there were no boxes left, no invitations, no seats among the so-called old money elite. So they decided to build their own opera house, grander, more opulent, and open to those who had made their fortunes through grit rather than inheritance. This was the birth of the Metropolitan Opera, not from art alone, but from social rebellion draped in culture. The first night, Faust and Firelight. October 22, 1883. The air outside buzzed with anticipation. As the crowd entered the newly built Opera House on Broadway and 39th Street, the grandeur took their breath away, its golden arches, red velvet curtains, and chandeliers glimmering like constellations. Inside, history was about to be made. The first performance, Charles Gounod's Faust. The orchestra tuned, a hush fell, and as the first notes soared through the hall, New York changed forever. For the first time, an American city, not Vienna, not Paris, hosted an opera performance that could rival the European greats. It was more than music. It was identity. As the soprano's voice filled the space, many in the audience realized that the United States had reached a new cultural maturity. The echoes of that opening night still ripple through time, a reminder of when America found its artistic soul. Behind the curtain, the ambition and the architects. The Metropolitan Opera House didn't appear out of thin air. It was the product of vision and defiance. The architect J. Cleveland Cady designed the building in a Renaissance revival style, combining elegance with power. The auditorium alone could seat over 3,600 guests, an enormous number for its day. Its golden horseshoe-shaped tiers became iconic, and every curve seemed designed not just for acoustics, but for spectacle. The real patrons, however, were the industrialists, men like Cornelius Vanderbilt Thekun and J.P. Morgan, who poured money into the project not only to enjoy music, but to shape the culture of the new America. Each gilded box in the Opera House became a symbol of power, just as valuable as any business empire. Yet ironically, their quest to create a more inclusive cultural space still ended up mirroring the same exclusivity they sought to escape. But that contradiction is what made the Metropolitan Opera so human. It was art born from rivalry and beauty born from ego. Music as a mirror of society. As the years passed, the Metropolitan Opera grew from a social experiment into the beating heart of American classical music. Every season brought legendary performances. Sopranos like Enrico Caruso, Rosa Poncelle, and Maria Callas would grace its stage, turning nights of music into moments of immortality. In its orchestra pit, maestros like Arturo Toscanini demanded perfection, while behind the scenes, stagehands and designers worked tirelessly to produce the kind of magic that only opera can deliver, where tragedy and triumph, love and loss, all unfold through voice and symphony. But beyond the stage, something else was happening. Opera was no longer a European import. It was an American passion. People from all walks of life began to attend. Students, dreamers, artists, and even those who could barely afford a ticket all came to feel the emotion that could only be found in the soaring notes of Verdi or the haunting silence before a curtain fall. From fire to fame, tragedy struck in 1892 when the original Metropolitan Opera House was gutted by fire. Flames devoured the grand structure, leaving nothing but blackened walls and broken chandeliers. For a moment, it seemed as though the dream of America's grand opera was over. But within months, the city rallied. Money poured in, architects drew new plans, and the Opera House rose again, rebuilt, stronger, and even more magnificent. It became a symbol of resilience and renewal, reflecting the very spirit of New York itself. By the 20th century, the Metropolitan Opera wasn't just a building, it was an institution. Radio broadcasts carried its performances into homes across the nation, bringing opera to farmers in Kansas, miners in Colorado, and dreamers in California. It became, in a very real sense, the sound of America growing up. From Caruso to the modern stage. Through the decades, the Met's stage became sacred ground. When Enrico Caruso sang there in the early 1900s, audiences wept openly. His voice was so powerful, so pure, that it transcended language. Later, in the mid-20th century, Maria Callas brought operatic drama to new emotional heights, while Luciano Pavarotti turned opera into a global phenomenon. The Met became the epicenter of excellence, where every aria carried the weight of legacy. And yet, it continued to evolve, embracing modern productions, new technology, and diverse performers who reflected the changing face of America itself. Today, whether it's a performance of Puccini's La Bohème or a bold contemporary composition, the Metropolitan Opera remains what it has always been, a living conversation between the past and the future. The architecture of emotion. To stand inside the Met, even today, is to feel history humming beneath your feet. Every column, every red seat, every whisper between acts carries the energy of generations who came before, people who believed that art wasn't a luxury but a necessity. It's a cathedral of emotion where the walls remember the laughter, the tears, the applause, and even the silence of moments too sacred for words. The new Metropolitan Opera House, located in Lincoln Center since 1966, continues this legacy. Designed by Wallace K. Harrison, it stands as a temple of glass and light, modern yet timeless. And when the curtain rises, the same sense of wonder fills the air, just as it did on that first night in 1883. The legacy lives. On more than a century later, the Met is no longer just New York's opera house. It is the world's stage. Its productions reach millions through live HD broadcasts in cinemas across the globe. The Met's digital archives preserve decades of performances, ensuring that every aria, duet, and symphony remains immortal. But perhaps its greatest legacy lies in what it inspired: a belief that art matters, that in a world driven by noise and speed, there's still room for beauty, still time for a note to linger, still meaning in a story sung, not spoken. The Met was never just about music. It was about humanity finding its higher voice. Epilogue: the night that never ended. When the audience stepped out of the Metropolitan Opera House that first night in 1883, the city outside seemed different, quieter perhaps, or simply humbled by what it had just witnessed. The music of Faust had faded, but something deeper had begun, a cultural awakening that would define New York and America for generations. Every great nation has its monuments. Rome has its Colosseum, Paris its Louvre. But for America, the Metropolitan Opera became something more intimate, a mirror of its soul. And so, when the curtain falls each night and the applause echoes through the hall, it isn't just for the singers or the orchestra. It is for every dreamer who believes that art can change the world. Number 9. Thomas Edison's first experiment with a high-resistance carbon filament, 1879. The night humanity defied the dark. It was October 22, 1879, a night that began in quiet obscurity inside a small laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. The world outside was cloaked in darkness, lit only by gas lamps and flickering candles. But inside that humble building, a man was preparing to rewrite human history, not through war, not through politics, but through light itself. His name was Thomas Alva Edison, and on that night, he conducted one of the most important experiments in human civilization: the successful test of a high-resistance carbon filament, the heart of the first practical incandescent light bulb. What followed wasn't just a scientific victory, it was the moment the world conquered night. The world before the bulb. To understand the gravity of Edison's experiment, one must imagine life before electric light. Cities were dim and dangerous after dusk, factories closed early, productivity halted, and homes flickered under the weak glow of whale oil lamps or kerosene flames that stung the air with smoke. Fire hazards were constant. Light was a luxury, not a guarantee. The night was something people respected, sometimes even feared. Yet humanity had always dreamed of taming it. From the moment early humans gathered around fire, the desire to banish darkness was as old as civilization itself. Edison was not the first to chase that dream. Many before him had tried. Humphrey Davy, in the early 1800s, created an electric arc lamp. Others like Warren de la Rue and Joseph Swan experimented with filaments and electricity, but their designs burned out too quickly, consumed too much energy, or were too fragile to be practical. The world needed light that was stable, affordable, and enduring. And that's where Edison entered the story. Menlo Park, the birthplace of modern invention. Edison's laboratory in Menlo Park was no ordinary workshop. It was a factory of ideas buzzing with engineers, chemists, and machinists who worked day and night. There were no white coats or sterile benches, just the smell of hot metal, wood, and ink-stained notebooks. It was chaotic genius at work. Edison often called it his invention factory, and it was here that modern research and development were born. By 1878, he had already achieved fame for inventing the phonograph, but the light bulb was his next obsession. He wanted to bring safe, reliable illumination to homes and streets, not just for the wealthy, but for everyone. So began thousands of experiments. Bamboo fibers, cotton threads, horsehair, and even strips of cardboard were tested. Each filament was heated, watched, and measured. Most failed within seconds. But Edison was relentless. He believed, as he famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." October 22, 1879, the moment the darkness broke. That night, Edison inserted a carbonized cotton thread filament into a glass bulb from which all air had been removed, a vacuum. When he connected the current, the filament glowed, brilliantly. Not for seconds, not for minutes, but for over 13 hours. It was an astonishing success. In his diary that evening, Edison's assistant, Charles Batchelor, noted the result with calm understatement. Carbon of a uniform thread connected to leading wires, burned beautifully. But make no mistake, this was a revolution in progress. For the first time, light was no longer a fleeting spark. It was controlled, sustained, and safe. Humanity had, in essence, built a miniature sun, one that could fit inside a glass sphere. The spark that ignited an era word of Edison's success spread quickly. Newspapers from New York to London heralded the invention that would turn night into day. But Edison wasn't finished. He improved the design relentlessly, testing thousands of materials to find the perfect filament. He eventually discovered that carbonized bamboo could glow for over 200 hours, leading to his first patent in 1880. The incandescent bulb wasn't just a marvel, it was a foundation. It illuminated homes, factories, and streets, transforming how people lived, worked, and dreamed. Work shifts extended into the night. Cities grew safer. Families could read, dine, and socialize long after sunset. The concept of nightlife was born. Cafes, theaters, and newspapers thrived. Electricity became the new lifeblood of civilization. The human story behind the genius Edison was often painted as a lone genius, but the truth is far more human. He was a leader, yes, but also a listener. Menlo Park thrived on collaboration. People like Francis Upton, Charles Batchelor, and John Crusoe were indispensable. Together, they didn't just invent a bulb, they invented a system: power generation, distribution, switches, sockets, and meters. Edison once said, "The light bulb was only part of the idea. We had to make electricity practical." And so he did. By 1882, Edison opened the Pearl Street Station in Manhattan, the world's first commercial power plant, lighting up an entire district. It marked the beginning of the modern electrical age. The war of currents, light and shadow. But progress, as always, cast shadows. As Edison's direct current DC system began spreading, Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse challenged it with alternating current, AC, which could travel long distances efficiently. The war of currents was fierce, filled with public demonstrations, smear campaigns, and technological one-upmanship. Though Edison eventually lost the current war, the foundations he laid, his understanding of innovation, marketing, and mass production, kept his name forever tied to electricity's rise. Even amid rivalry, his light burned undimmed. More than a bulb, a symbol of humanity. The light bulb became more than an invention. It became a metaphor. A symbol of human brilliance, of ideas flickering to life in the mind's darkness. From art to advertising, cartoons to corporate logos, a glowing bulb has come to mean inspiration. And rightfully so. Edison's moment in 1879 wasn't merely about physics. It was about hope. It said that no matter how vast the dark, we can build our own dawn. The glow that never died. If you walk through the Edison Memorial Tower in New Jersey today, you'll find a replica of that original Menlo Park bulb. It's simple, fragile even, but it represents the courage to imagine. From that fragile filament came the electricity that powers our homes, the circuits that drive our devices, and the very screens upon which you're reading these words. Edison didn't just light the world, he illuminated the path to modern life. He turned energy into progress, imagination into infrastructure. And perhaps that's why, when he died in 1931, the United States dimmed its lights in tribute. Across cities and towns, for one solemn minute, The world he had illuminated returned to darkness, as if to say, this is what life was before Edison. A legacy eternal. Every glowing bulb, every neon sign, every city skyline shimmering at midnight traces its ancestry back to that October night in 1879. The experiment that lasted 13 hours gave humanity 13 decades, and counting, of innovation. Edison's invention didn't just change how we see the world, it changed what we could become. We became explorers of time, unbound by sunset. We became creators, thinkers, dreamers who worked under our own constellations of light. It wasn't the conquest of nature. It was a partnership between curiosity and courage, between darkness and discovery. And that's why, as we flick a switch tonight, in that tiny instant of illumination, we are still echoing Edison's experiment, still reaching for that same brilliance he sparked more than a century ago. And there you have it. October 22nd, a date stitched with brilliance, courage, invention, and voice. From André-Jacques Garnerin's daring leap into the Parisian sky, to Kennedy's tense words during the Cuban Missile Crisis that kept the world holding its breath. From the echoing aria inside the Metropolitan Opera House, to Edison's single glowing bulb that conquered the darkness. This day wasn't ordinary, it was electrifying. Every October 22nd whispers one truth through time, that progress begins the moment someone dares to imagine a world brighter than yesterday. We saw heroes and inventors, artists and leaders, each of them turning their moment into a movement. From the power of a voice breaking the stigma on International Stuttering Awareness Day, to the flavor of celebration on National Nut Day, humanity has always found a way to celebrate life, whether through words, music, or light. And that's what history really is, our shared heartbeat through time. Before you go, take one more look at that light glowing in your room right now. It's more than a switch. It's a reminder of that single October night in 1879, when Thomas Edison defied the dark and changed forever how we live, dream, and see the world. And if today's journey through history lit even a spark of curiosity in you, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with your community, because tomorrow's story is just as fascinating. Join us again for October 23rd, where we'll uncover new tales of genius, courage, and wonder from this day in history. Until then, keep your minds bright, your hearts curious, and your lights shining. History isn't just the past, it is the pulse that keeps humanity moving forward.